Greetings. My name is Vikash Jagu. As part of my EDSN 4501 course, we have been learning about course design. We are now at the stage of presenting the implementation of a pilot course that we have designed. In this video, I will present my pilot course that I've developed, and I will also highlight the different design principles that were used in developing the course. From the outset, I should mention that the course that I have developed is part of a university qualification, and as such, it comes with some forms of injustice that is beyond my control. For example, the course is not open for everyone. It has some selection criteria, which is used to restrict our numbers. Students are forced to pay for the course, and the course is fairly structured in the way it is offered. However, I have introduced some form of flexibility in the approach. With that being said, let's jump straight into my presentation of the implementation. My course has been developed using Moodle as the learning management system. This is the landing page, and I am logging in as a student. Using these credentials, the student would log in, obviously using their credentials, and I am going to select the pilot course that I've designed. This is now the landing page. This contains 5 different blocks. The first block is the announcement. This is where the student will get a summary of all the important announcements, due dates, and assignments that may be due. The next block is where they will receive the welcome. This helps to create a social presence in terms of greetings, meeting the class, etc., which we'll go through in a short while. The next block deals with the course outline and logistics. In doing so, this creates the teaching presence, and it has the course outline with office hours, the timetables, etc. We then come to the next block that has the lectures, where you would now find the cognitive presence in this particular block. And we'll go through the weekly lessons, etc. And finally, there is a discussion forum. And with the discussion forum, students have the ability to post questions should they need technical support, or if there's any teaching support that's required, they can post questions, and these questions could be answered either by the lecturer or by their peers. So these are the main blocks on the landing page. Let's now look at the welcome block. As I indicated, this part creates a social presence for the student. It starts off with a greeting, a welcome, where the students are welcome to the subject. You will notice as part of this design, I've got a little image that is carried through the entire design of this course to just create a bit of a fun element. In this screen here, I explain a bit more about the course. Going back, I give the students an opportunity for them to introduce themselves, to just take a pic of themselves and to say something about themselves as well. I'm making use of Padlet. Students can then add a little block and they can introduce themselves. So each student would have done so, and at the end, students can get to know each other a little better. Then they get the opportunity to meet the lecturer. Here I've got a video of myself just to create a personal experience. Clicking on this video, I introduce myself. As the video progresses, I give a little more detail about myself. I give a bit of a more personal experience in terms of my likes, etc., which the students can start to relate to on a personal capacity. Then I've introduced netiquette, which I thought was important. These are brand new students coming out of grade 12. They would have worked in the online space. However, I thought for their own protection, it's important to give them some rules in terms of how to operate and behave in an online class. I've got a video. All the videos that are on this particular site, they can download the video, which makes it easier in terms of working online or offline. And then I do have another link that explains further in terms of how to behave in an online environment. Then, if I go back to my landing page, I have a WhatsApp group. I thought this would be important for the students and lecturers to be part of a WhatsApp group where they can ask questions and get answers, immediate answers, as and when they have any problems or any general questions that may arise. That link, once the group is created, would be added here, where students can then be added very easily into the WhatsApp group. So for this particular block, this design catered for a social experience for the student, where they get to meet their classmates, they get to meet the lecturer, and it gives them a bit of an experience in terms of what to expect and how to behave in an online space. The next block is the course outline and logistics block. This is where I try to create a teaching presence. The course outline is given. Clicking on that, it opens up a typical course outline, which can be saved and students can view offline. I'm not going to take you through this entire, what a typical course outline would contain. And I then have a course plan at a glance. In this instance, I'm showing how the file could be downloaded, and it could then be opened directly in whatever program the student may be using. Here, they can see the course at a glance in terms of the notional hours, the credits, assessments, the breakdown of the assessments, the feedback, how feedback is obtained using the auto marker, individualized feedback. So this gives them a better understanding of how I would give them feedback. It has a complete breakdown of how the weekly plan for lectures, self-study, the tasks that they have to also engage in. And it also shows on each day how the lectures are broken up. So it gives them a better understanding of the particular course. Finally, I also have, no, sorry, it's not, I have the office hours. Here I'm trying to create a presence for the students to know and understand that at certain times I will be available. So on a Monday from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, I've got a link. It'll be a recurring link. When I click on it, it'll open up automatically in MS Teams. I'm not going to go into that. And the students will then be available. They can come into these particular times and they can answer any questions that they may have. Apart from the office hours, I've also got a timetable for computer lab usage. I thought that this was important to introduce into my design, as some of my students may not have access to a laptop or a computer, or they may have data or connectivity issues, in which case the computer lab on campus has been booked at certain times where students can go in during this time. Obviously, you can see that I've made a mistake here. It should be from 1500 hours. There are 2-hour slots, so it should have been till 1700 hours. And this is the lab where they will go into, and they have access to a computer. The next block on the landing page is the lecture block. Everything dealing with the lectures that take place can be found on this particular block. It starts off with the weekly lessons. We'll go into that in more detail now. And here we can find the lecture recordings. Clicking on that, the recording of every lecture will be found and the link will be made active. And this will take place approximately an hour after the lecture has ended. Then we have quizzes. The quiz is made available and tasks for the student to attempt. However, all quizzes and all tasks can be activated through the weekly lessons. So let's interrogate this particular link in more detail to understand how that works. Clicking on the weekly links takes you to week 1. That's where we're starting. In week 1, where we are discussing a particular topic, but the learning outcome is specified in terms of interpret a sequential program in Python syntax and obtain the correct output. So I clearly state the learning outcome, and there's a description of what's going to be happening for that week while we are attempting to achieve that particular learning outcome. If I scroll down the page, then I get a table of contents, and this is quite interesting. The table of contents gives me my week-by-week breakdown in terms of what happens. So in week 1, I've got a pre-lecture, I've got a live lecture 1, and I've got a second live lecture. There's assessment tasks, self-study, practice, and consolidation. And this design has been derived from Lauriade's conversational framework, where you first attempt to get students to understand the concepts. This is what happens initially. Some type of an assessment takes place to determine students' understanding. And once the concepts are in place, then we move into the practice. So this is pretty much a standard way in which all the weeks are designed. Let's go into each of these in more detail. So for week 1, there is a pre-lecture task, which helps the students when they get to the live lesson. There are some controls here that allow me to move from 1.1 to 1.2 that you saw on the table of contents. And for this pre-lecture task, there are some videos that the student can watch. And as I indicated earlier, all the videos are downloadable, so students can watch them offline. There are some websites that the students will need to go to. The instructions are clearly outlined in terms of what needs to be done at that website. So students will need to go through a particular tutorial, which is interactive, where they can try out different things. And once they've completed these, they have a much better understanding when they come to the live lecture. These controls allow me to move to the next section, which is 1.2. Clicking on that, it takes me to my lesson, my first live lecture. Here, when the students arrive at this particular page, you can go to your meeting link, and this takes you to MS Teams. I'm not going to click on this link. It works similar to the previous link that I demonstrated. They also have access to the slides that I will be using. I will speak a bit more about how the slides are designed a little later. And for each of the lessons, the class will be opened 15 minutes before time. The idea here is to engage with the students to create a more social environment. They can turn on their webcams during that time. So it helps to connect with the student before actually going into the content. Moving on, that first live lecture was a 60-minute lecture. The second live lecture is a 30-minute lecture. The reasoning behind this particular lecture, it's because most of these students are second language learners, and the lessons are presented in English. So here students have the opportunity to be put into groups where they can have discussions in their first language. And at the end of 20 minutes, they will be brought back into the main session, and I will then clarify any misunderstandings that they may have. So that is the second lecture, a live lecture that takes place synchronously. Thereafter, clicking on 1.4, this is where the formative assessment takes place. This particular assessment is in the form of a quiz. The students have 2 attempts to conduct this or to attempt this quiz, and it also carries a certain percentage towards the final mark, as was outlined earlier on when the student looked at the course at a glance. The due date is at the end of the week, so it has some flexibility in the sense that they can go to the quiz, attempt it the first time, get some idea. There's feedback that's provided with the quiz. They can learn from their mistakes, and before the end of the week, they can then complete the quiz. Clicking on this particular quiz brings me to this page. I've set up a short quiz with just 3 questions, and they would be attempting the quiz for the first time. The quiz, as part of an assessment, aligns to the learning outcome and the activities where we were interpreting code. So all the questions have to do with interpretation of the code. I'm just going to select any answers, and I will go through the quiz very quickly, clicking on each of these answers, and I will finish my attempt, and I will then submit, and I will finish that particular quiz. At the end of the quiz, there is feedback that is provided. In this instance, the answer was incorrect. The correct answer is not given. An explanation of this particular option is given. So it requires the student to do more research and to determine which is the correct answer. And the same applies for the other questions where feedback is obtained. So this is where the formative assessment will take place. After the formative assessment, students are then given self-study tasks that they would need to complete on their own. Instructions are given. There are certain links that the student will need to go to execute those instructions. After the self-study, students then move on to the practice tasks. Having now mastered the concepts, then they move on to the practice tasks. Because this is just week 1, the practice task is in the form of a quiz. I'm not going to go into the quiz because this quiz is very similar to the previous one that I've demonstrated. So they get to practice interpreting of questions. And finally, the week ends with consolidation. And the consolidation for week 1 is in the form of reflection. The task is given where they have to reflect on the week's work, and they can identify things they enjoyed about the lesson and things that they did not enjoy about the lesson. So this feedback will allow me to make adjustments in terms of how I present my work as the weeks go by. But this is where the students will need to reflect more deeply in terms of questions, and this is where marks will be awarded in terms of the weekly reflections. There is a due date for these reflections. There is some flexibility with the due date where a soft deadline is given. At the end of the week, they should have reflected and uploaded something to the MS Teams notebook, which I will explain a bit later. All reflections are entered in MS Teams that has a notebook that is shared with the lecturer. And after the lecturer has given comments, there is a hard deadline which has to be submitted at the end of 2. I'm not giving too much of flexibility in this regard, simply because with students, we all know if they don't have a hard deadline, everything will just be left till the end of the course, and then it can become panic. So this is how all of the reflective activities are given in terms of a hard and a soft deadline. So this demonstrates how every week will be conducted in terms of the pre-lecture, the lecture, the self-study, and finally, the consolidation. I would just like to highlight 2 other important features. In week 2, there is an assessment task which is different from week 1. In this particular task, if I click on it, it takes me to an auto marker. This course is very practical in nature, so students are required to, in week 2, they are now moving away from interpreting. They are now actually designing some programs, and when they start designing and practicing the writing of the programs, Moodle has a feature where the student can type in the actual program and it will automatically get marked. So this is the auto marker. This is where they type the program. The question is outlined. There is an evaluation. And once they click on evaluate, they get immediate feedback in terms of whether the program is correct or not. And if it's incorrect, they could try as many times as they want until they do get it right. Alternatively, at the lecture 2, they can then request for assistance and they will get assistance with the particular task. The slides for any typical lecture would take on a format very similar to this. So these are my slides for week 1. You will notice I've described the learning outcome clearly, so the students know what it is we want to achieve. Then the session is broken up into exactly what is going to be done in terms of, in this particular lesson, there's some exploring, breakaway groups, there's some teaching in terms of what is syntax, interpreting valid and invalid syntax, some describing with some examples. And in these examples, interpretation of code will be taking place, and there will be breakaway groups. There is a tool that I use frequently. It's called Slido. And this tool allows me on the fly to make a poll or give a poll to the students where I can get information as and when I feel the need arises. Just like when you're in a face-to-face classroom and you want to test understanding at a particular case, and just by looking at facial expressions, you can tell whether the students understand or not. So this is the engagement tool that I use. Students need to go into this link, and the hashtag they use is Let's Go, and that will take them to my particular page. Thereafter, there are sessions that are created where they will be split into groups. There are breakaway rooms that are created. Then there's a Jamboard where they will do some brainstorming. This is to allow interaction with the students. Here, they need to interpret a particular code, which is in line with the learning outcome. So they would do that, and that's how the learning and the understanding would take place. There's more engagement in terms of the Jamboard. This allows the students to interact more with me. And finally, as they go into breakaway rooms, each group has a slide where they will be making their comments. And through these slides, I can monitor the type of activities that are taking place in a particular group. The slides are designed, the lessons are designed to create interaction with the students, to keep them engaged so that learning can take place. This is MS Teams, where you can see that it has a class notebook, and the class notebook will be used for the students' reflections. It will be made use through the collaborative space where I have access in terms of the students' reflections, and I can comment on it. Another nice feature with MS Teams, when our students register, they are automatically linked to MS Teams. So the registration process takes place a lot smoother in terms of linking them to the particular course that I will be taking. So that's another advantage of using MS Teams as a system to synchronously interact and engage with the students. So this is the design of my pilot course as I've taken you through all of the different features. And at the end, there's also a calendar tool where the students can click on and they can go directly to the lecture. In conclusion, my learning design, I looked at my personas of the students who will be taking the course, and I knew some of them may not have computers, so they do have a mobile smartphone. So content was developed, keeping that at the back of my mind. Collaborative activities were created because that's what the students indicated that they wanted. They learn better through these collaborative activities, especially when they are learning in a second language. A special lesson was created so that they can collaborate and discuss in their first language. Then I looked at the presence. I tried to incorporate the social presence, the teaching presence, and the cognitive presence as well. The use of chunking was used to prevent cognitive overload. And the principle of connect before content was also introduced in terms of students logging in early, and the lecturer can connect with the students. In terms of the design, Laureate's conversational framework was used, where concepts are discussed and understood, but individually and collaboratively before the practice kicks in thereafter. In terms of assessment and feedback, the assessments, I attempted to make them flexible with soft and hard deadlines, well, flexible to some degree. In terms of feedback, there's an auto marker in Moodle. There's questions and answers where feedback can be obtained from peers as well as the lecturer. There's a discussion forum and WhatsApp groups. In terms of affordance of the tools, MS Teams was chosen because of its ability of it being licensed, firstly, with no restrictions. Creating groups becomes easy. It has a class notebook where you can share and collaborate for the reflections. Moodle, it has a mobile feature that was important for those students who don't have a computer, and the auto marker, which is your VPL plugin. Google Drive was used to store the slides, presentations, and notes. Tools to create interactivity was the Jamboard, Padlet for students to introduce themselves, Kahoot for quizzes, which could be used, and Slido, which is used to create interaction during the lecture. Some of the ways in which injustice, care, and equity was introduced. In this instance, the mobile app for me was seemed to be important. Therefore, Moodle was chosen. Students can download videos, notes, and work offline. The lectures were created with student interaction so that they can discuss things in their mother tongue. These are not, although the lectures are in English, that's not their first language. When examples are given, scaffolding is introduced so that students are taken from the simple as they move towards the more complex. The examples are given with a local context that students can relate to. There's flexibility in terms of the assessment, some form of flexibility in terms of soft and hard deadlines, and there's immediate feedback that's provided in terms of the auto marker. These were some of the ways I felt that I've addressed injustice, equity, and care, as given by Fraser and Mahabali. This brings me to the end of